DoxyPEP has been reducing STIs across the country, but people have questions. Today, I'm going to answer the top questions from Google about DoxyPEP. Let's get started. The first one that people want to know is DoxyPEP effective? Well, what a great question. Let's talk about that right now. The first thing you have to understand is that DoxyPEP attacks gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. So you take the antibiotic within 72 hours after unprotected sex, including unprotected oral sex, because all three of these spread through unprotected oral sex as well. And it reduces your likelihood of contracting and then spreading all three of these bacterial STIs. How effective has it been? Well, these three bacterial STIs have decreased for the past 3 years in a row in the United States. And prior to that, they were increasing. Nobody knows for sure that that's because of DoxyPEP, but we can safely assume that DoxyPEP had a lot to do with it. Now, in the clinical trials, it showed that it decreased gonorrhea rates by about 50% and chlamydia and syphilis rates by about 2/3. It's actually done better than expected in terms of syphilis and chlamydia, and a little bit worse than expected with an asterisk there, which I'm going to explain to you, with gonorrhea. So syphilis and chlamydia, neither one of them have any resistance at all to doxycycline. They have studied this in the labs and found out that it is possible, but in the real world, there has never been an incident where chlamydia or syphilis were resistant to doxycycline out in the real world. Why? Well, those two bacterial STIs just don't develop antibiotic resistance very easily. As a matter of fact, syphilis is still killed by penicillin, the initial antibiotic, like that, whereas gonorrhea very quickly went through penicillin when it was first developed in the 1940s. So syphilis and chlamydia don't evolve that quickly. They don't develop resistance that easily, but gonorrhea certainly does. So even though that gonorrhea rates have decreased across the country for the past 3 years, what we're seeing undoubtedly is a higher and higher percentage of the gonorrhea that people do contract nowadays have a gene called TET-M, which make it resistant to doxycycline. Now, did DoxyPEP cause that resistance? No. How do I know that? Because this resistance began 40 years ago. Doctors in the United States stopped treating gonorrhea with doxycycline over 40 years ago because of this gene and because of this resistance. So, Robert, you're telling us that more and more of the gonorrhea out there is resistant to doxycycline, yet DoxyPEP is still reducing the number of gonorrhea cases. How can that possibly be? Well, let's think about it like this. Let's pretend that you're a farmer and you have 1,000 acres of corn, and you notice that you're starting to get some weeds out in your corn. And so you choose a herbicide, not a pesticide, but a herbicide is what kills weeds. And you choose a herbicide that about 50% of the weeds in your field are resistant to, and 50% of them are not resistant to. Now you spray your field, what's going to happen? You're going to kill the 50% of weeds that are not resistant to your herbicide, and the ones that are left are resistant. So if you were to sample your field, you would have less weeds. However, a much higher percentage of them would be resistant to that herbicide. And that is essentially what we are seeing with doxycycline and DoxyPEP out in the world. But to answer this question, yes, it's been effective. It's caused the decrease of bacterial STIs, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis for 3 years in a row. And when you look at studies that are coming out, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where the uptake is really high, we're seeing real world results from DoxyPEP. Is DoxyPEP, free? Well, let me tell you something, guys. Nothing is free. One of the things that bothers me is when people go to a public health center or something else like that, and they get STI tested or they get DoxyPEP. I think that's fantastic. I wish more of those resources existed. But the thing that you have to remember about that is that those are taxpayer dollars that are being spent on that. The doctors working there are not working for free. The lab techs are not working for free. The phlebotomists that are drawing your blood are not working for free. The pharmacists are not working for free. And the doxycycline and DoxyPEP is not free. It may be that somebody else is paying for that, and that's wonderful and that's awesome. And if you have the ability to get that in your community, then you should absolutely consider pursuing that. But it's just always bothered me when people call that free, because I think it's disrespectful to the fact that it's not free. The air is free, right? Doxycycline and healthcare is never free. It may be that somebody else is paying for it. Is DoxyPEP covered by insurance? Well, if you were wondering why I didn't talk about insurance when we were talking about free, here's why. I knew it was coming up. DoxyPEP is almost certainly covered by your insurance. The question is, do you have a physician that knows how to do this properly? Look, we're pretty new on YouTube and we haven't gotten a lot of comments yet. By the way, if you like this video, one of the number one things you can do is leave a comment. I would really, really appreciate it. But look at this comment right here. This person went to their doctor, and so they probably used their insurance. Their insurance likely covered the doctor appointment and the DoxyPEP, but what did they get? They got a single dose of DoxyPEP. So the next time this person has sex, he's expected to go back to his doctor and get another dose of DoxyPEP. That doesn't make any sense. So what people really need is a year's supply of DoxyPEP on hand. That way, when they have sex, heat of the moment, whatever happens, they already have it. They already have it in their medicine cabinet at home so they can take it and protect themselves. So yes, DoxyPEP is probably covered by your insurance. The key is finding the right doctor who is knowledgeable enough about DoxyPEP to be able to prescribe this for you properly so that you have several doses on hand. Is DoxyPEP HIV question mark? Well, I think what this person wants to know is, does DoxyPEP protect you from HIV? No. DoxyPEP protects you from certain bacterial STIs, which might be susceptible to doxycycline. And that is gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. And it might even be true for many strains of Mycoplasma genitalium, although there's only one study on that I have found. There may be additional things that people start to talk about in the future, but for right now, you should really think about DoxyPEP in terms of gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. Now, if you want to protect yourself from HIV, there is PEP for HIV, but that is the antiviral medication. It has absolutely nothing to do with DoxyPEP because the doxy in DoxyPEP stands for doxycycline, which is an antibiotic, not an antiviral. Is DoxyPEP women question mark? Oh, I did not do that well. My apologies. Well, this is a great question. DoxyPEP absolutely works for women. There is no doubt about that. And if you've heard any differently, it's because of a misunderstanding of the initial science. Look, most STI research in the United States today is for men who have sex with men. I look at all of the STI journals. That is absolutely true. Even all around the world, most of the focus is on men who have sex with men. Why? Well, they are disproportionately impacted by STIs, but they're certainly not the only group impacted by STIs. And as a matter of fact, when you're talking about gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis, all three of those disproportionately affect women in terms of their health. I mean, with syphilis, for example, congenital syphilis, and that is where a baby is born with syphilis, is a huge public health nightmare in the United States. It is completely preventable by simply better prenatal care and possibly even some tools like DoxyPEP to prevent them from getting syphilis in the first place, right? Gonorrhea and chlamydia can create pelvic inflammatory disease, fertility issues, dramatically increase the risk of women contracting HIV if they encounter HIV. And so it's always bothered me that most of the focus is on men who have sex with men, simply because I think it downplays the risk to other groups like women. So when the initial studies about DoxyPEP came out, there were a number of studies amongst men who have sex with men, but only one study on women. And that study was on women in Kenya. And it showed no statistical difference between the women who were taking DoxyPEP and the women who were not taking DoxyPEP when it came to bacterial STIs. But here's the punchline that people, generally speaking, don't understand. When they took hair samples, and I don't even have enough hair to exhibit that, but when they took hair samples from the women, what they found was that most, and I'm not exaggerating, most of the women in the study who were supposed to have been taking DoxyPEP and who said they were taking DoxyPEP after sex, when they took a hair sample, most of them had lied about their participation in the study. And so if you look at the clinical trial data, or excuse me, the clinical guidelines for DoxyPEP from the CDC, it talks about this. And it says there's no data that shows that it works in women because there was only one study. And because the women were not honest about their participation for whatever reason, it didn't show any difference. However, there was no reason why it wouldn't work in women. When you look at uterine tissue, vaginal tissue, etc., the amount of doxycycline in those tissues is actually higher than it is in men. You treat women with chlamydia with doxycycline the same way that you do in men. And there was a study out of Japan with female sex workers which showed a huge, huge decrease in gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis amongst female sex workers in Japan. And this is critically important, everybody. It showed no increase in bacterial vaginosis or yeast infection. So does DoxyPEP work in women? Absolutely. It's utterly ridiculous to think otherwise. Well, I have mangled my board a little bit, but the show must go on. Is DoxyPEP taken daily? What a great question. So you take DoxyPEP within 72 hours of sex. So if you have unprotected sex one time per year, then you would take DoxyPEP one time per year. The clinical guidelines say you can take it up to daily. So if somebody's having 365 experiences per year, they can take it every single day. I got to tell you though, as a company that prescribes this to thousands of people, that is very, very rare. In fact, we don't have anybody that has nearly that many doses in a year. So we offered in 15 doses, 30 doses, and 40 doses, because as I talked about earlier, it's critically important to have this on hand. You absolutely do not want like a single dose and then have to go back to the doctor. That's just not going to work. That'd be like going to the doctor every single time to get a prescription for a condom before you hook up. It's like, no, you kind of just need a pack of condoms. You also need DoxyPEP on hand. Is DoxyPEP Doxycycline? Yes, it's the antibiotic doxycycline, which many of you have taken for acne or some very basic skin infections. It's been around for about 50 years or so. A very safe, very well understood, very well studied antibiotic. You take a single dose, which is 200 milligrams within 72 hours after sex, and that's it. Is doxycycline only for women? Well, I'm a little surprised that that was in here, to be honest with you, because typically what people think is that it's only for men. But no, of course, it's not only for women, it's for both men and women. And I'll tell you something interesting. I saw somebody on Reddit the other day who said that he understands that this only works in gay men. There's no biological differences in how antibiotic works between gay men and straight men, or gay women or straight women, or you name it. It works the same in everybody. Is doxycycline bad for you? Well, that is the question of the day, right? You are taking an antibiotic, and that is not exactly positive for you. There are plenty of studies undergoing now talking about, does this change the gut bacteria in people who take it, for example? If so, how often do you have to take it for this to actually become a problem? But I think what people need to understand is that when you get a bacterial STI, which are incredibly common, in the United States today, 1 out of 15 sexually active young women has chlamydia. I didn't say had, I said has chlamydia, as we're all watching this video. This is a huge problem in the United States. And when they finally find out they have it, which might be when they finally become symptomatic, because 70% of them are currently asymptomatic, or they go in for their OBGYN appointment and they just get preemptively screened or something like that, many of them are going to have had chlamydia for years, which can cause a number of health problems, including increasing their likelihood of contracting HIV, fertility issues, you name it. So I think the question isn't just, is DoxyPEP bad for you? Is having chlamydia, gonorrhea, or syphilis bad for you? And is taking the full nuclear bomb load of antibiotics that it takes to cure those infections good for you or bad for you? There is no easy answers here. DoxyPEP is a tool, just like a condom is a tool. And it's being studied to see, is this going to negatively impact the health of people who take it? And is this going to negatively impact the health of the world as a whole when it comes to things like antibiotic resistance? Well, we are sex positive at our core here at Shameless Care. That comes from me as the owner, our doctors, everybody involved. We love answering your sexual health questions. Let us know what our next video should be about, and I'll see you guys soon.